Well, second day of PaizoCon, and one more summary to kind of put up. This one is going to be the Primal Previews. This is going to be talking about Rage of Elements and Howl of the Wild, and how they're going to bring elemental as well as new wildlife and creatures into Pathfinder. And my name is Don. I'm trying to be the Sly Strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. So this particular panel was brought by Logan Bonner, Michael Sire, James Case, and Eleanor Farron. We'll start with Rage of Elements, which is what they started with. Basically, elemental stuff, kind of what you might be thinking that is going to happen. One of the major things for players that they brought up was the Kineticist class from Pathfinder 1E is coming back. It has already been play tested. It is the master of the elements and uses impulses in order to interact with the world. There are a whole bunch of things that they can do, and the elements that they have are kind of with them at all times. Basically brought up water impulses, and we were able to get a good look, straight up good look at a page of that. So Rage of Elements is now the elemental book. It is what we're going to be using in order to bring elements into the particular Pathfinder game. This features spells, magic items, monsters, archetypes, and the big one, which is kind of like the big reveal for this, which is the Kineticist class. This Kineticist has already been play tested, and it is the master of the elements. It uses impulses in order to bring these elements out into the world. These are things that they can do all the time. And one of the things that they really brought up was the water impulses. One of the first kind of things they brought up is, although that, there are the traditional 4 impulses, and then they're bringing in 2 more new ones. But you can also do things called dual element impulses that allow you to combine these, like the ambush bladderwort, which was wood and water, the whirling grindstone, which is metal and earth, a lightning rod impulse where you can use metal to call down a bolt of lightning. And the whole kind of point of doing this is that you can be a master of a single element, or you can combine elements. One of the things I brought up, it was actually in a question at the end, but I'll bring it forward here, is are there healing elements to a kineticist? Water and wood do have healing elements, so that's something kind of good. Right now, you pretty much have a cleric, bard, and then a few other things that you can do with medic archetype and with various skills that you can take in order to have a healer, maybe another healing type class that you could do. So this started back way back into last year in an alpha playtest, and they're bringing it out now with the Kineticist. The spread of the book, there is basically a chapter for each one of the element. I really couldn't get a good picture. Logan actually held it up for a second, and I'll take a look and see if I can put it up, but it was not a great picture. You do have the option to collect all the elements or focus on one. They brought up one that was because someone asked a question in the chat, which was, if you can have a magma kineticist and have like a lava leap or molten wire. Don't know if that was supposed to be a little preview or if that was just something that they brought up. I didn't particularly see that question in the chat, but we shall see. So basically what you do is you activate a kinetic aura. It is always flowing through you normally, and the kinetic aura is the first thing you activate. You have it around you all the time, and the example they have is fire all around you, and when we see the picture of Yoon, you'll see that. And she is the iconic character kineticist. She was someone from Pathfinder First Edition, but she was younger then. Now she is a all-grown-up adult and has been adventuring in Changia. And one thing I noticed on the particular picture, and maybe you can take a look at it, is on her left shoulder, there is a familiar, looked like an owl with a eye injury. So that might be interesting. The elements that are being added are wood and metal. And then we have, water, fire, wind, and earth or air. Chianjia is the source of the wood and metal. One of the things that was talked about yesterday, but now I kind of get a little bit more, is how there is no longer a metal armor thing for druids. That's because the metal plane is being brought in and is seen as a natural element now. So that is why that is going away. And also that this whole kind of theming of this book. I don't want to say theming, but Rage of Elements is connected to Shangia. Imperial dragons still have been manifested in this book, and they're very tied into Shangia as well. You choose your elemental philosophy. The Inner Sea traditionally had the original 4. And then with this new book here, you have a cycle of elements for all 6. There's a chapter for each element. Each chapter has a lore section, new spells, new items, and monsters tied to that element. Then we talked about how appearing in Shangia is building on the concepts of the elements into the character guide and the understanding of the creatures, and how dragons are connected to that cycle. These things come from the planes, but you don't need to go to the planes to use the elements in your characters. A big example they had here was the plane of water. It is a little bit about the lore where James kind of brought up the fact that it is almost entirely underwater. However, there are towers that go up, and they are in a bubble of air for the air breathers, and then some towers that actually hang down into deeper and heavier water, kind of like from the first edition. The dangers of the planes of water is that some of the water is denser than normal water, so you'll be going along and exploring various regions. You'll see, well, why are there bones and glittering magic treasures sitting there and no one's taking them? It's because there's this denser water there. There are some peaceful places and some not so much. There are new elemental lords. One that they brought up was Verilorn. He's a custodian of earth and ash. He's pretty much a lonely gardener paired with Shumonui, who is the other elemental lord of wood. Because of these new elemental lords, there has been some changes with the relationships between some of the elemental lords, but we didn't really go into that. Then they brought up some creatures and monsters. Have a good picture. I'll go ahead and throw that up. First one I'll talk about on the left is the Avalanche Legion. It is a troop element, and every particular element is going to get a troop for you to do like a hordes of elemental thing or type of attack. These particular Avalanche Legions, if you notice, they have the kind of like the heavier round stone at the foot, and it's going to be kind of like a rolling way of locomotion, kind of like a pretty familiar Star Wars droid. They have a whole new suite of metal and wood elementals, and one of the new metal creatures is the one on the right. It is the, let's see if I can pronounce this correctly, Capertelix. It's from the plane of metal. The plane of metal is very active into decay, which you wouldn't think of, but if the way that they put it is there's a lot of rusting and decaying going on. This particular one was called a cross between a Rubik's Cube and one of those little Make a Monster book where you flip the top half and the bottom half in order to make different faces on a monster or a person. Well, each different expression on each face and how it rotates can be used to change its moods. It hangs out generally in certain spots and is very depressed, shoots lasers out of its eyes. That was very specific, and each hand is a different metal. So if you are weak to silver, it has a silver hand. If you are weak to dark iron, it has a dark iron hand. Things like that. The other one they brought up was Genies. It is the first book, since this is the first book that is in sync with the Monster Core and the remaster, there are changes to Genies. There are new Genies for metal and wood. The one that I got was Kizithar. You can pick this up in summer, and it's available both in the regular and a special edition. And they also gave us a little quick picture of a planar diagram, which I thought was great. Once again, held up from a book, so it's not the greatest picture. Then we moved into Howl of the Wild. It is the latest creature book. It has animals, beasts, and is focused on the natural world. A bit of the backstory is there are 4 wardens of the wild, and they are 4 mythical people. Unfortunately, they named them, but I just couldn't get all of them. I didn't understand the last 3. The first one was Peace and Sky. I need to find out more about these names, and if I do, I will go ahead and tell you, but they did give us this diagram for it. Now you have your normal naturalist. The naturalist is the narrator. He's an Uruxi naturalist, and he goes on the Zoetrope, which you've already seen pictures of from some of the other previews, and his 6 eccentric crew members to find the 4 wardens of the wild. So that is the theming of this particular book. One that they brought up was the Hydra. The Hydra is just a spin on the mythological and kind of bring it back to that. They showed a picture of one that has a rainbow theme. Didn't really go into what all that means, but I'm hoping that each one of the the fins maybe does a different type of damage. There are some other variants. There are some that can eat star metals. And then they also brought up a new monster called the Mocking Chorus, which is something that mimics creatures. Very cool presentation of it. And then some are getting some cool new scientific illustrations, and I'll go ahead and put that up. And they lean into the old Darwin type illustrations. Triclea is the Minotaur that is one of this crew, and she is the one that kind of does the drawing. Now, as far as specifics, they didn't go too far into it because this book is still being written, unlike the Elemental book, which is already finished and is going to be available this summer. So we didn't get really, really specific, but they did talk about some more monsters that we can talk about. One was the Spellsong Lyrebird. It was basically a grad student's failed thesis. It's based on real birds that mimic sounds like parrots and mockingbirds, but basically a bunch of wizards wanted to create a familiar that helps them cast spells. And the way they kind of described it is they kind of rushed it and something went wrong. And because of that, now these birds are in the wild and they are able to cast spells independently. They can do things like cast Fireball or Charm, and they might have used Fireball to get out, or they might have charmed some grad students in order to let them out into the wild, and they are now an invasive species. The last creature they kind of brought up is the starfish-based mammoth landstar. It regrows its limbs, and what it can do is it can throw off limbs when it's threatened, and is capable of swallowing people and digesting them while they're still alive. So definitely not great news on that. But this is also a rule book, so they brought up the fact that there are archetypes that take inspiration from the natural world, 6 new ancestries, and they went into more detail on the 2 we know. So we still only know Minotaur and Centaur, but they gave us more detail on them. So the Minotaur ancestry, it is a large creature, very strong and tough. There is a variant called the Little Horn Minotaur that is medium-sized if the large size isn't a benefit to you. All of the strength and power, but in a more compact body. They said the feats that from this are fun. It leans into stonework masonry and labyrinth lore and connections to mazes and abilities. So although it is a very large and frightening hunter, they also have a feat that is kind of this isn't the name, but they just kind of describe it. They can do an alarming disappearance where they'll be very big and imposing, and all of a sudden they just vanish. And it can be terrifying. It's kind of like a fun way to have a Minotaur rogue. They wanted to make sure it tied back to Greek mythology, and a specific action that they talked about was a friendly fling action where kind of like a fastball special, an ally into position in a battle. Then we talked about the Centaur. The Centaur is a nomadic type creature. They protect their lands. They're skilled with bows and lances. They are also a large type creature, but they can be medium with like a pony type of centaur. They didn't really get too specific on that. Powerful hooves. You could have a mottled coat for sneaking around, so sort of like camouflage patterned. One of the things they brought up is that they are very big into like green speakers and faith speakers. So there is a budding speaker heritage to kind of lean you into magic if that was your bent. Very big on herbalism, very big on mentorship, and very big on competition. They specifically said they're very well-rounded and interesting. That will be proven when we read it, but it sure sounds great actually to me. And they can get trample and they can stomp on people. This is a question from the very end that I'll bring up into this section just so it's kind of all together. One of the questions was, is there an option for riding and fighting together? Yes, there are some rules for things like a sprite riding on its shoulder in order to be a combined unit. You can specialize it if you want to. And they also brought up another one, which would be a way for you to train. So maybe your halfling friend with a bow can be shooting off your back while you're fighting from the front. And then one big tease for the remaining 4 ancestries is the Minotaur and the Centaur are from Greek mythology. The last 4 are not. And of the last 4, one of those is a totally brand new creature, not related to a specific mythology. Then we got into some questions. I talked about the Centaur option already. They wanted to know if there was a barbarian option in Rage of Elements. There is a barbarian instinct in Rage of Elements. And they also, once again, brought up how there is no longer the Iron Druid feat in the Rage of Elements, since all druids can have metal armor. There's a question about area of effect impulses. There is a decent number of those, but they're being a bit careful with it since these aren't like spells and they can be cast fairly regularly. They are not limited in how often you can use them, but you need a zone to work with. Some elements lean into that AoE playstyle, but not literally casting Fireball over and over and over. There's kind of a funny question about are Donde Leshy great or the best heritage combo? 3 of them said it was a great all-arounder, but not the best. And then Michael brought up a Dampier Leshy, which is basically a blood orange kind of a vibe. There was a question about the ecological niche for the Mammoth Landstar. And they once again brought up the name. It's a Landstar, so it's not necessarily just in the water or going to be on the beach. It can expel air from its arms, and therefore it can propel itself silently. So it does have stealthy movements, and it can be encountered on land. Also, a question about why Tianjia does not consider air an element. And they brought up because you can't see air, so they thought of it more as a transitional type space rather than an element itself, even though it has a plane. A question came up about the playtest. Apparently, you can read about the Kineticist playtest by going to paizo.com and looking for a blog on the playtest of the Kineticist. But basically, the changes they made is it has the same class DC analogs to the spell attack roll. And this is where we found out about the Kineticist. Water and wood do have healing abilities. And then they talked about what if you wanted to do other damage types. There are versatile blasts that allow you to combine some particular damage types, as well as they brought up like a specific example with water. You might have a choice to use bludgeoning or cold damage, depending on what you want to do. Well, that's the summary of the Primal Previews, and I hope you got something out of it. It kind of condenses that 1 hour long thing into hopefully a smaller video. But I hope you liked it. And if you did, feel free to like, subscribe, or hit that notification bell. But whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.